My son and his wife went off on a cruise and left me in charge of my 8-year-old grandson, a boy who had never spoken a single word in his life. The second the front door clicked shut behind them, he stopped rocking in his chair, lifted his head, stared straight into my eyes, and whispered in a perfectly clear voice, "Grandma, don't drink the tea Mom made for you." My blood ran ice cold. "I'm so glad you're here with me. Stay until the end of my story, and write in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels." I never in my life imagined that looking after my 8-year-old grandson would turn everything I thought I knew upside down. At 66, I believed I'd already seen every kind of surprise life could throw at me. I was very, very wrong. The morning Dean and Nyla left for their 7-day cruise, I felt that familiar mix of happiness and fatigue that always came with caring for Damien. He had been labeled nonverbal since birth. I adored that child with all my heart, but our time together was always built on silent gestures, patient observation, and the constant ache of wondering what was going on behind those bright brown eyes. "Mom, are you sure you can manage him for a whole week?" Dean asked for the third time, as he loaded their suitcases into the car. His voice had that tone I knew too well by now. Love tangled with duty, like looking after his own mother was just one more task on an already overloaded to-do list. "I've been raising children since before you were born," I reminded him, pulling my cardigan tighter against the crisp October air. "Damien and I will be just fine." Nyla stepped out of the house then, her platinum blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. She moved with the kind of easy confidence you only see in people who have never really had to question their place in the world. At 34, she had the sort of beauty that turned heads, and an ambition that never seemed satisfied with what she already possessed. "Lucinda, I've prepared some special tea for you," she said, her voice dripping with sweet concern. "It's that chamomile blend you love so much. I made enough to last the whole week. Just add hot water to the packets I left on the counter." I nodded, thankful on the surface, though there was something in her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's very kind of you, dear." "And remember," she went on, resting a manicured hand on my shoulder, "Damien's bedtime is exactly 8 p.m. He gets very upset if his routine changes. The pediatrician said consistency is essential for children with his condition." Damien stood close beside me, his small hand wrapped in mine. He wore his favorite dinosaur t-shirt and clutched the worn stuffed elephant he'd carried around since he was 2. To anyone watching, he was the classic picture of a special needs child, quiet, withdrawn, seemingly dependent on the adults around him for every decision and every step. "We'll keep his routine," I assured them. Secretly, though, I couldn't help wondering how much of this rigid schedule he truly needed, and how much of it was simply another way for Nyla to keep control, even from miles away. After a final round of hugs and repeated instructions, Dean and Nyla finally pulled out of the driveway, their luxury sedan gliding around the corner toward the highway that would take them to the port. I stayed on the front porch, waving until the car vanished from sight, Damien's hand still safely tucked in mine. "Well, sweetheart," I said as we turned back toward the house, "it's just you and Grandma for the next 7 days." He looked up at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. For a brief second, I could have sworn I saw something flicker in them, a depth, an awareness that didn't match the diagnosis he'd carried his whole life. Then he tugged at my hand, eager to get inside to his toys, and I brushed the feeling aside as nothing more than a grandmother's hopeful imagination. We spent the rest of the morning in the living room. I worked through my crossword puzzle while Damien carefully lined up his action figures in intricate little formations on the coffee table. Without Dean and Nyla's presence, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but also calmer. The tension that usually hovered in the air like an invisible fog had lifted, leaving only the easy silence of two people who genuinely liked being together. Around 11:00, I decided to try some of that special tea Nyla had prepared. The packets were arranged in a neat row on the kitchen counter, each one labeled in her careful handwriting, "For Lucinda, chamomile comfort blend." I really did appreciate the gesture. It was unusually considerate for Nyla, who normally seemed far more invested in appearances than in true kindness. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then tore open one of the packets. The dried flowers and herbs smelled pleasant enough, chamomile for sure, but there was also another scent beneath it, faintly medicinal and strangely out of place in a simple herbal tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I listened to Damien moving around in the living room. Normally, he played quietly, completely absorbed in his own little universe. But today he seemed uneasy. I could hear his footsteps pacing back and forth, the old wooden floorboards complaining under his small body. The kettle whistled, and I poured the hot water over the tea packet, watching the liquid deepen in color. It turned much darker than I would have expected from chamomile, a rich amber shade that looked more intense than any bedtime tea I'd ever brewed. I reached for the honey, and that's when I heard it. A sound so shocking, so utterly impossible, that the ceramic mug nearly slipped from my hands. "Grandma, don't drink that tea." The voice was tiny, but unmistakably clear, real. I spun around and saw Damien standing in the kitchen doorway, his brown eyes locked onto mine with a focus that made my breath hitch. For 8 years, this child had never uttered a single word. For 8 years I had wondered what his voice might sound like, what kind of thoughts lived behind his silence. "Damien," I breathed, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Did you speak?" He stepped closer, his small fists clenched at his sides. "Grandma, please don't drink the tea," he said. "Mom put something in it. Something bad." The mug slipped from my numb fingers and smashed against the kitchen floor, shards of ceramic and scalding tea spraying in every direction. The crash rang through the house, but it barely registered. My mind was spinning, trying desperately to catch up with what I had just heard. "You can talk," I whispered, collapsing into a chair before my legs completely gave out. "All this time, you could talk." Damien nodded gravely and moved to stand right beside me. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he said quietly. "I wanted to tell you before, but I was scared. Mom said if I ever talked to anyone except when she said it was okay, something really bad would happen to you." "What do you mean?" I asked, even though a sick certainty was already forming in the pit of my stomach. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place in a way that made me feel physically ill. "She makes me pretend," he said, his voice trembling. "When other people are around, especially doctors, I have to act like I don't understand. But I hear everything, Grandma. I see everything." My hands shook as I pulled him into my arms, feeling the warmth and weight of his small body. 8 years of silence, 8 years believing my grandson was locked away in a world I could never enter. 8 years of watching Nyla play the devoted mother role, caring for a special needs child. 8 years of trusting reports, evaluations, therapy sessions, and endless meetings with specialists. "What did she put in my tea?" I managed to ask, though a part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Damien drew back to look up at me, his face far too serious for an 8-year-old. "Medicine," he said, "the kind that makes you sleepy and mixed up. She's been doing it for a long time, Grandma. That's why you've been so tired and forgetting things lately." The room seemed to tilt as the truth hit me. Nyla had been drugging me, slowly, deliberately, methodically, and she'd used my own grandson as part of her act, forcing him to live a lie that had defined how all of us saw him. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. "A long time," he said. "I learned how to read when I was 4, but I pretended I couldn't. I listen when Mom and Dad talk at night. They think I'm asleep, but I'm not." The strength it must have taken for this child to keep up that charade for years nearly broke my heart. To live in enforced silence, letting the world believe he couldn't speak or understand, all while fully aware of everything happening around him. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because they're gone," he replied simply, "and because I heard Mom on the phone yesterday. She said she was going to speed things up while they were away. She made the tea packet stronger this time, Grandma. A lot stronger." My gaze dropped to the floor, to the shattered mug and the dark tea spreading across the white tiles like a stain of pure malice. If Damien hadn't spoken, I would have drunk that tea without a second thought. I would have accepted Nyla's kindness, the same way I had been accepting it for months. "We need to be very careful," I told him, my mind starting to churn through possibilities. "If your mother finds out you told me—" "She won't," Damien interrupted with a calm certainty that startled me. "I know how to pretend. I've been doing it my whole life. But now we can work together, Grandma. We can stop her." The resolve in his young voice was both heartbreaking and incredible. All this time, he had been trying to survive and protect me in the only way he knew how. And now, finally, we had a chance to protect each other. As I knelt to clean up the broken ceramic, my hands still shaking from the shock and the revelations, I understood that everything I thought I knew about my family had just shattered along with that cup. The next 7 days weren't going to be a simple week of babysitting. They were going to be a battle. For my future, for his, and maybe for the truth itself. And for the first time in months, despite the fear twisting in my chest, I felt fully, painfully awake. Later, the afternoon sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows as Damien and I sat at the small round table, sharing grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. It felt surreal. Such an ordinary lunch wrapped around the most extraordinary change of my life. We were talking. After 8 silent years, I could finally hear my grandson's thoughts, his curiosity, his view of the world. "Tell me about the medicine," I said softly, cutting his sandwich into smaller pieces without even thinking. "How long has your mother been putting it in my tea?" Damien chewed slowly, thinking. "I think it started about 2 years ago," he said. "That's when you started sleeping more when you visited, and when Mom began telling Dad you were getting confused about things." 2 years. I sifted back through my memories, remembering when Dean and Nyla first started voicing their concerns about my forgetfulness. At first it was just little things, misplacing my car keys, losing my train of thought in the middle of a sentence, feeling bone-deep exhaustion even after a full night's sleep. I'd chalked it up to age, maybe even the early signs of the cognitive decline that ran in my family. "What exactly does she put in the tea?" I asked, even though I dreaded the answer. "Different pills," Damien said, his tone flat in that strangely calm way children sometimes have when describing terrible things. "She crushes them really, really small. I saw her through the crack in their bedroom door. She has a little container with powder, and she uses a tiny spoon to mix it into the tea packets." The deliberate routine of it made my stomach twist. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was careful, intentional, the work of someone with a plan and the patience to carry it out. "Do you know what kind of pills?" I pushed gently. Damien nodded, and what he said next turned my blood to ice. "Sleep medicine, the really strong kind, and some white ones that she said are for making old people calm. I heard her tell Dad that if you take enough of them for a long time, it can cause something called cognitive decline, and that doctors would just think it's normal for someone your age." I set my spoon down, unable to even pretend to keep eating. The picture Damien was painting wasn't just disturbing, it was terrifying. This wasn't only about my health. This was about my mind, my independence, my legal capacity to make decisions for myself. "Your father," I said slowly. "Does he know?" Damien's expression tightened, and I saw the hurt of a child forced to see his parents as something other than safe. "At first, he didn't want to hear it," he said, "but Mom kept talking about how expensive it is to take care of you when you get older, and how it would be better for everyone if you just went to sleep and didn't wake up." The words hit me like a physical punch. My own son, listening to his wife discuss my death like a budget strategy. "Dad doesn't like it," Damien added quickly when he saw my face. "He gets mad when Mom talks like that, but he's scared of her grandma just like I am. She gets really angry when people don't do what she wants." I reached across the table and wrapped my fingers around his small hand. "What does she do when she gets angry?" "She doesn't hit or anything," he said, which should have comforted me, but somehow didn't. But she knows how to make people sorry, like when I was 5, and I accidentally said "mama" in front of the doctor. Later, she told me if I ever talked again when I wasn't supposed to, she'd send me away to a special hospital and I'd never see you or Dad again. The cruelty of that threat made my throat burn. A 5-year-old boy just beginning to understand language and the world, silenced with the fear of losing everyone he loved. She said the doctors there would give me shots that make me sleep all the time, he went on, and that even if I tried to tell them what happened, no one would believe me. She said some kids go to places like that, and their families forget about them forever. I had to blink hard to keep my tears from spilling. The level of psychological manipulation, the way she twisted his fears and dependency into weapons, it was monstrous. "But you're very smart," I told him, squeezing his hand gently. "Smarter than she thinks." "I had to be," Damien said simply. After that, I started paying attention to everything. I learned to read by watching TV when no one was looking. I figured out what adults really meant, not just the words they said in front of me. His resilience stunned me. While other 8-year-olds were worrying about homework and video games, my grandson had been running a quiet survival mission, collecting information that might one day save both of us. "What else have you learned?" I asked. "Mom looks up stuff on her computer," he said. "She doesn't know I can read, so sometimes she leaves it open when she goes for coffee. I've seen pages about something called elder abuse and how hard it is to prove, and a lot of things about natural causes and what doctors expect when old people get sick." Every new detail was another jagged piece of a horrible picture. Nyla wasn't just poisoning me, she was studying how to do it properly, how to make sure any damage or death looked ordinary, inevitable. "She also searches about kids like me," Damien continued, "children with developmental disabilities, and how they're bad witnesses if something bad happens." The scope of her planning was almost beyond belief. She wasn't only silencing Damien in day-to-day life, she was building a world where, even if he tried to talk, his words could be easily dismissed. "There's something else," he said, lowering his voice to a whisper. "She's been making the tea stronger every time. Yesterday, when she was packing the packets for this week, I heard her on the phone with someone. She said she was tired of waiting for nature to do it, and it was time to move the timeline up." A cold, hollow feeling opened in my chest. If Nyla was planning to speed up whatever she'd started 2 years ago, then this week, while she and Dean were comfortably on a cruise surrounded by witnesses, might have been chosen as the week I didn't survive. "Do you know who she was talking to?" I asked. "I don't know," Damien said. "She didn't say a name." Whoever she was talking to on that call, they weren't just listening, they were helping her plan. Damien said they discussed how much of the medicine would be enough and how to make sure there wouldn't be any investigation afterward. This was bigger than just my daughter-in-law's greed. Someone else was involved, someone offering advice, support, or both. "Damien," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "do you understand what your mother is trying to do to me?" He nodded, his expression grave. "She wants you to die, Grandma," he said plainly. "She thinks if you die, Dad will get your house and all your money. Then she can control everything because Dad does whatever she tells him to." Out of the mouths of children. In a few simple sentences, my 8-year-old grandson had articulated the truth I'd been too trusting, too loving to see clearly. Nyla didn't see me as a person, or even as family. I was an obstacle between her and a $450,000 house plus my savings. "But here's what she doesn't know," I said, feeling a spark of fierce resolve ignite in my chest. "I'm not as easy to get rid of as she thinks I am, and I have something she never planned for." "What's that?" Damien asked. "I have you," I told him, "and you are the smartest, bravest person I've ever met." A real smile, soft, genuine, and startling after so many years of blank expressions, spread across his face. "What are we going to do?" he asked. I glanced around my kitchen, the cozy space that had always felt like the heart of my home. The light outside was already starting to fade. Evening would come soon. Somewhere out in the middle of the ocean, Dean and Nyla were probably clinking champagne glasses, convinced their little plan was already in motion. "We're going to be very careful," I said. "We're going to document everything, and we're going to make sure that when this week is over, your mother has to face the consequences of what she's tried to do to both of us." "But how?" Damien asked. "Adults don't listen to kids, and they really don't listen to kids like me, kids who aren't supposed to talk." He wasn't wrong. The very lie Nyla had built around him would make it easier to dismiss anything he said. But there was one advantage she didn't know I had. "Leave that part to me," I told him. "Your job is to keep being exactly who you've been pretending to be when other people are around. Can you do that?" "I've been doing it for 8 years," he replied with a calm certainty that broke my heart and filled me with pride at the same time. As we finished our lunch, a plan started to take shape in my mind. Nyla had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated both of us. She saw me as a confused, aging woman, too foggy to recognize what was happening. She saw Damien as a disabled child, too limited to understand or speak the truth. She was wrong on both counts, and by the time Dean and Nyla stepped off that cruise ship, I intended to have enough proof to ensure that my grandson and I would never have to be afraid of her again. The real question was whether we could gather that evidence before the concentrated doses in those tea packets finished what 2 years of slow poisoning had started. Time was against us, but for the first time in months, I wasn't facing it alone. The second day without Dean and Nyla brought an odd, almost startling clarity to my house. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like I was fighting through a heavy mental fog. My mind felt sharp, awake in a way I'd nearly forgotten. The absence of Nyla's special tea was like breaking the surface after being held underwater too long. The night before, Damien and I had put together what we called our safety plan. During the day, when neighbors could see us through the windows or if anyone stopped by, he would slip back into his role as the quiet, distant child everyone believed him to be. But behind closed doors, when we were certain we were alone, he could finally be himself, bright, perceptive, and far too grown up for his age. "Grandma," he said at breakfast, his voice still edged with wonder at being allowed to talk freely, "I need to show you something, but we have to be really careful." "What kind of something?" I asked, already bracing myself at the seriousness in his eyes. "Mom's research," he said. "She printed some stuff and hid it in my room. She thought I couldn't read, so she figured it was the safest place." We went upstairs to the small guest room that became Damien's whenever he stayed with me. The walls were covered in cheerful dinosaur wallpaper I'd put up when he was 4, hoping it might encourage him to be more expressive. Now, knowing the truth, those cartoon dinosaurs almost seemed to be silently watching us. Damien walked to his dresser and carefully moved aside his neatly folded clothes. Hidden underneath, wrapped in one of his old baby blankets, was a manila folder. "She checks it sometimes," he whispered, even though we'd already made sure the house was empty. "She thinks I just like the blanket because it's soft, but really, I'm making sure she doesn't move the papers." He handed me the folder with the gravity of a child passing on classified files. In many ways, that's exactly what they were. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was a printout from a medical website, the heading staring up at me. "Signs of natural cognitive decline in elderly patients." Someone, Nyla I assumed, had gone through the first article with a yellow highlighter. Progressive memory loss, increased confusion and disorientation, changes in sleep patterns and appetite, difficulty with complex tasks. Every highlighted phrase described what I'd been experiencing for the past 2 years, symptoms that had convinced my own son his mother was slipping into dementia. The second document was even worse. It was an article about when elderly parents become a burden, making difficult care decisions. The margins were full of handwritten notes in Nyla's neat script. Nursing home? 15,000 month minimum legal issues of incompetency hearings, timing, timeline considerations, but it was the third document that made my blood turn to ice. Medication interactions in elderly patients, accidental overdoses, and their prevention. This one was covered in annotations. Sections about how certain combinations of sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medications could cause respiratory depression in older adults were underlined again and again. In the margins were numbers, dosage calculations, timing intervals, and notes about how to space doses to avoid immediate suspicion. "Damien," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "where did your mother get these medications?" "Different places," he replied, settling beside me on the bed. "Some she got from doctors by saying she couldn't sleep. Some she ordered online with fake names. And some—" He hesitated, clearly wrestling with something especially hard to say. "Some she got from Mrs. Henderson next door," he finished in a rush. Mrs. Henderson. My elderly neighbor in her 70s who lived alone with her 3 cats. I'd been checking in on her ever since her hip surgery last year. "Mrs. Henderson?" I repeated. "Mom volunteers to pick up her prescriptions sometimes," Damien explained. "Mrs. Henderson has really strong pain medicine and sleep pills because of her surgery. Mom always offers to help, and Mrs. Henderson is thankful because it's hard for her to get to the pharmacy." The picture was coming into terrifying focus. Nyla had been quietly collecting pills from multiple sources, building a stockpile of drugs she could combine in ways that would look like accidents to anyone who didn't know the truth. "There's more," Damien said softly. He reached back into the folder and pulled out a handwritten sheet. "She's been keeping track." At the top, in Nyla's precise handwriting, were the words, "LM, Progress Notes, my initials, Lucinda Morrison." Below that was a list of dates spanning the last 2 years, each followed by a short clinical note. March 15th, first dose administered, no immediate reaction. Subject appears tired but attributes to normal aging. April 2nd, increased dose slightly. Subject reports feeling foggy but expresses no suspicion. June 10th, noticeable improvement in compliance. Subject more confused, easier to influence. September 3rd, breakthrough episode. Subject temporarily lucid and questions memory issues. Reduced dosage for 1 week to avoid suspicion. The cold, detached tone was almost worse than the content. Nyla had been documenting my poisoning like a lab experiment, tracking my decline with the same careful attention someone might give to a recipe or a financial spreadsheet. The most recent entries were the ones that truly terrified me. October 1st, timeline acceleration necessary. Financial pressures increasing. Subject must be eliminated before next quarterly financial review. October 10th, prepared concentrated doses for cruise week. Calculated amounts should be sufficient for permanent resolution within 48 to 72 hours of administration. My hands shook as I set the pages down. Nyla hadn't just been slowly poisoning me over time. She had chosen a specific window for my death, and she had planned it to fall exactly during the week she and Dean were away on their cruise, giving them perfect alibis while I supposedly died of natural causes, alone in my house. "Grandma?" Damien's voice was small and anxious. "Are you okay?" I looked at this incredible child who had been protecting both of us in the only way he knew how, staying silent to keep us safe, all while secretly gathering the evidence that might save our lives. The weight he had been carrying, watching the woman who called herself his mother plan the death of the grandmother who truly loved him. It was almost unbearable to think about. "I'm okay," I told him, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "But we have to be even more careful than we thought." "What do you mean?" I showed him the final entry on Nyla's list. His face went pale as he read the words about permanent resolution. "She's not planning to let the medicine work slowly anymore," I explained gently. "She's planning to give me enough this week to make sure I don't wake up at all." Damien was silent for a long moment, processing it with a gravity far beyond his years. Then he lifted his head, his eyes steady and determined. "Then we have to stop her before she comes back," he said. "How?" I asked. "We document everything," he said, repeating my own words from the day before. "But not just the papers." "We need proof I can really talk," Damien said calmly. "Proof she's been lying about me, and proof about the medicine." He was right. The papers in my hands were damning, but a clever lawyer could still try to dismiss them as circumstantial. What we needed was concrete, undeniable evidence of Nyla's intent and methods. "I think I have an idea," I said slowly, feeling the outline of a plan start to come together. "But it's going to require you to be very brave." "I've had to be brave my whole life, Grandma," he replied simply. "I can be brave a little longer." That afternoon, while Damien took a proper nap, a real peaceful sleep instead of the drugged haze Nyla's medicine would have caused, I started making phone calls. First, I rang my attorney, Margaret Chen, who had managed my legal affairs for over 15 years. "Lucinda?" She greeted me warmly. "What a nice surprise. How are you feeling? Dean mentioned you've been having some memory trouble." So Dean had already been talking to her about my supposed decline. Another piece clicking into place. Had he been laying the foundation for a declaration of incompetence? "Actually, Margaret, I'm feeling better than I have in months," I said. "But I need to ask you something important. Hypothetically, if someone was secretly giving an elderly person medications without their knowledge, what kind of proof would be needed to show it?" There was a brief pause. "Lucinda, is this hypothetical really about something specific you're worried about?" "It might be," I admitted. "I'd rather not discuss details over the phone just yet, but I may need your help very soon." "Of course," she said. "In that kind of situation, the strongest evidence would be medical tests that show unprescribed drugs in the person's system, plus documentation that shows intent and opportunity. Video evidence would be excellent, though it can be hard to get." Video. The word lit up a new corner of my plan. "What about audio?" I asked. "If someone admitted what they were doing, would a recording be useful?" "Audio recordings can sometimes be admissible, depending on the circumstances and local laws," she said. "But Lucinda, if you're in immediate danger, you need to call the police." "I'm safe for now," I assured her, and for the moment that was true, as long as I didn't consume anything Nyla had prepared, but I may need you ready to move quickly when I call. After hanging up with Margaret, I dialed my doctor, Patricia Reeves, who had been treating me for 10 years. "Dr. Reeves," I said once she picked up, "I need to talk to you about the memory problems I've been having. Is it possible they could be caused by medication, not just aging?" "Absolutely," she replied immediately. "Drug interactions in older patients can look exactly like dementia: confusion, forgetfulness, changes in behavior. Have you started any new medications or supplements?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I said. "If I wanted to check whether there are medications in my system that I didn't knowingly take, what would we need to do?" "A full blood panel and urine analysis should detect most commonly used medications," she explained, "though timing matters. Some substances leave the system quickly." "Lucinda, this sounds serious. Are you worried someone might be giving you drugs without your consent?" "It's a possibility," I said quietly. "Could you run those tests if I come in tomorrow?" "Of course," she said. "I'll have my nurse book you for first thing in the morning." When I ended the call, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. We had Neela's printed notes and her own written progress reports. Soon we would have medical proof inside my bloodstream, and if my new idea worked, we might also capture her own words admitting what she'd done. But before that, we needed bait. And for the trap to work, Nyla had to believe her plan was unfolding exactly the way she wanted. When Damien woke up, I sat him down and explained everything. His eyes widened as the plan sank in, but he nodded with that same steady courage he'd been showing since the moment he first spoke. "She's going to call tonight to check on us," he said. "She always calls on the second day." "Perfect," I said, even though there was nothing perfect about any of it. "When she calls, we're going to give her exactly what she expects to hear." As the evening crept in, I felt the weight of what we were about to attempt. We were stepping into the most dangerous part of our plan, convincing Nyla that her scheme was working while secretly collecting the evidence that could destroy it. The phone rang at exactly 8 p.m., just like Damien predicted. As I reached for the receiver, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time in 2 years, my gaze looked clear and steady. Nyla was about to find out that her confused victim was far more aware than she imagined. "Hello, Lucinda." Nyla's smooth, practiced voice flowed through the line, perfectly balanced with concern. "How are you and Damien getting along?" I had taken my place at the kitchen table where I could see Damien in the living room. He sat on the floor, quietly playing with his action figures, silent, withdrawn, every inch the child she believed him to be. But I knew he was listening carefully to every syllable. We had rehearsed this call. It was time for both of us to act. "Oh, hello, dear," I said, letting my voice wobble and soften, adding a faint edge of confusion. We're doing fine, I think. Although I have to admit," I added, letting a weary sigh slip into my voice, "I've been feeling quite tired, more than usual." "Oh no," Nyla said, and beneath the surface of her concern I could hear a thin thread of satisfaction. "Have you been drinking the tea I prepared for you? It should help with that." Yes, I have," I lied smoothly. "It tastes a bit stronger than usual, but you always know what's best." She paused, and I could almost hear her doing the math in her head. If I'd actually been drinking the concentrated tea packets she'd prepared, I should already be showing serious side effects. "How has your appetite been?" she asked. I recognized the question immediately. She was trying to gauge whether the drugs were working as expected. "Not very good," I admitted, and that part was true. The stress of discovering what she'd been planning had killed whatever appetite I had left. "I've been feeling rather nauseous, and sometimes I lose track of what time it is." "That's completely normal at your age, Lucinda," Nyla replied. I had to grip the phone tighter to stop myself from snapping at the condescension in her tone. "Have you been taking your regular medications as well?" There it was, the trap. If I said yes, she would assume the combination of my legitimate prescriptions and her tainted tea was causing the expected decline. If I said no, she might suspect I'd changed something. "I think so," I said, letting uncertainty bleed into my voice. "To be honest, I've been having trouble remembering things. Yesterday, I couldn't remember if I'd given Damien lunch, and this morning I found my car keys in the refrigerator." The car keys story was fiction, but exactly the kind of confusion she would expect to see if her plan was working. "Oh my," Nyla said, and this time the satisfaction in her voice was impossible to miss. "That does sound concerning. Maybe when we get back we should talk about getting you some additional help around the house." Additional help. Her polite code for starting the process of declaring me incompetent and seizing control of my affairs. "How is Damien handling all this?" she asked next. "Is he being difficult? Sometimes children can sense when adults are having problems and it makes them act out." I glanced at my grandson, still arranging his action figures and listening to every word. The thought that this bright, perceptive child had been labeled and silenced for years because of a lie made anger flare in my chest. "He's been very quiet," I said truthfully. "More withdrawn than usual. He spends a lot of time just sitting and watching me." "That's probably for the best," Nyla said dismissively. "The less stimulation you have to deal with, the better. Just make sure he stays out of your way and doesn't cause any extra stress." The casual way she spoke about her own son, like he was nothing more than a possible inconvenience, was chilling. This woman didn't truly love either of us. To her, we were obstacles or tools to be managed in service of her goals. "Lucinda," she went on, slipping into what she no doubt thought was a caring tone, "I want you to promise me something. If you start feeling worse, if you get dizzy or have trouble breathing, don't try to drive anywhere, just rest, okay? Sometimes the best thing for someone your age is to lie down and let your body recover naturally." The message was clear. She expected those symptoms, she wanted them, and when they appeared, her advice was to keep me isolated and away from help. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "You're so thoughtful to worry about me." "That's what family is for," she replied. The hypocrisy of hearing those words from someone actively plotting my death nearly took my breath away. After a few more minutes of polite small talk and manufactured concern, Nyla ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for several minutes afterward, hands trembling with contained fury. "You did great, Grandma," Damien said, suddenly at my side. "She totally believed you." "How can you tell?" I asked. "Her voice changes when she's really happy," he explained with the sharp perception of a child who'd had to study adults to survive. It gets kind of sing-song, even when she's pretending to be worried. She sounded like that when you said you were confused. The fact that an 8-year-old had developed such a refined understanding of manipulation and deceit just to feel safe in his own home broke my heart. "Now what?" he asked. "Now we document everything," I said. "And tomorrow we start gathering the evidence that's going to stop her." That evening, I helped Damien write down everything he could remember about his mother's behavior over the past 2 years. His memory was astonishing. He recalled specific conversations, dates when strange medications first appeared in the house, times when Nyla had made suspicious phone calls or spent long stretches on her computer researching things she assumed he couldn't understand. "She keeps a journal," he told me as we worked. "She writes in it every night before bed. She thinks I'm asleep, but I've seen her." "What kind of journal?" I asked. "A little blue book she keeps in her nightstand," he said. "She writes about money stuff mostly, but sometimes about you and Dad and me. I saw her writing in it the night before they left for the cruise." A journal like that would be priceless evidence, but it was locked away in Nyla and Dean's bedroom for now. Still, Damien's knowledge of its existence and location would be crucial once the police became involved. The next morning, I went to my appointment with Dr. Reeves. I told her my concerns about someone possibly tampering with my medication, though I was careful not to reveal too much about the investigation Damien and I had already started. She took blood for a full toxicology screen and promised the results by the following day. "Lucinda," she said as we finished, her expression serious, "if someone has been giving you medications without your knowledge, that's a serious crime. Have you contacted the police?" "I'm gathering evidence first," I replied. "I want to be sure I have everything I need before I make accusations that could destroy my family." She nodded, though worry clouded her eyes. "Please be careful. If you're right, you could be in real danger." When I came home, Damien was waiting at the front window, watching for me. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. "We should know by tomorrow if there are drugs in my system that shouldn't be there," I told him, "but now we need to move on to the next part of our plan." "The recording?" I nodded. That morning, I'd bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind students use in lectures. It was tiny, easy to hide, and the audio quality was excellent. Our plan was to use it to capture Nyla incriminating herself once she returned from the cruise, but first, we had to rehearse exactly how things would play out. When Dean and Nyla walked back through the door, they would be expecting to find me far worse off than I really was. I needed to convincingly portray someone who'd been heavily drugged for days, while Damien slipped back into the role of the silent, special needs child he'd been forced to play for nearly his entire life. We spent the afternoon practicing. Damien coached me on how to look muddled and unfocused without overacting. After watching the real effects of Nyla's drugs on me for 2 years, he knew exactly what would seem believable. "You slur your words a little when you're really tired," he pointed out, "and you repeat yourself sometimes, like you forgot you already said it." "How do you know all this?" I asked, still astonished by how closely he'd been watching me. "I had to learn," he said. "I needed to know when you were really sick from the medicine and when you were just regular tired, so I could take care of you when Mom and Dad weren't paying attention." It hit me then. This child had been quietly protecting me for 2 years, guiding me to sit when I seemed unsteady, bringing me water when the drugs made me thirsty, staying near when I looked confused, all while pretending to be unresponsive and mute. That evening, over dinner, I realized just how much had changed in 3 short days. My mind felt sharper than it had in months. I felt stronger, more like myself. And most importantly, I wasn't fighting for my life alone anymore. "Grandma?" Damien asked as we washed the dishes. "After we stop Mom, what's going to happen to me?" It was the question I'd been avoiding because the truth was complicated. If Nyla was arrested, and if Dean was found to have gone along with her plan, Damien would need a new guardian. The idea of this extraordinary boy getting lost in the foster system was unbearable. But legally, I wasn't sure what options we had. "I don't know exactly," I told him honestly. "But I can promise you this, whatever happens, I will never let you be hurt again, and I will never let anyone force you to be silent again." He nodded, and I could see that he understood the uncertainty we were walking into, but there was trust in his eyes too. Trust that we would face it together. 2 more days, he said quietly. 2 more days until Dean and Nyla came home from their cruise, expecting a confused, failing old woman and a mute, compliant child. Instead, they'd walk into something very different. 2 more days to finish our preparations and brace ourselves for the confrontation that could change everything. That night, as I tucked Damien into bed, he looked up at me with those sharp brown eyes that had been silently taking in the world for far too long. "Grandma," he whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." "Why not?" I asked. "Because now you know the truth," he said. "And the truth is stronger than anything Mom can do." I kissed his forehead and turned off the light, praying he was right. The next day would bring the test results that would either prove or disprove the poisoning. The day after that would bring the showdown that would decide both our futures. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I actually believed we might win. The morning Dean and Nyla were due to return, the phone rang with the confirmation we'd been expecting and dreading. "Lucinda," Dr. Reeves said, her voice grave. "Your blood work is back, and I need you to come in immediately. In fact, I think we should involve the police." "What did you find?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer would be devastating. "Your tests show dangerous levels of multiple medications that are not on your prescription list," she said. "Lorazepam, diphenhydramine, and something called Zulpadam, all present in concentrations high enough to cause serious cognitive impairment, or worse. Lucinda, someone has been systematically poisoning you." The clinical confirmation of what Damien and I had uncovered sent a cold shiver through me, but it also lit a fierce, steady fire of resolve. Now we had proof. We weren't imagining things. We weren't overreacting. We had been the targets of a calculated attempt on my life. "How long will it take for these medications to leave my system?" I asked. "Given the levels we found, you've likely been drug-free for about 72 to 96 hours, she said. "That would explain why your mind feels clearer now. Lucinda, if whoever was giving you these drugs had continued increasing the doses, the outcome could have been fatal." Fatal. The word hung between us like a death sentence narrowly escaped. After I hung up with Dr. Reeves, I walked back into the living room. Damien was sitting on the floor, back in his familiar silent role, practicing for his parents' return. But when his eyes met mine, there was a sharpness there, a knowing intelligence that no one had cared enough to see for 8 long years. "The doctor confirmed everything," I told him quietly. "The drugs, the danger. All of it." He nodded, then glanced toward the small digital recorder we had hidden behind the row of books on the shelf. Everything was in place for the moment that would decide both our futures. At exactly 2:30 p.m., I heard the familiar crunch of tires in the driveway. Through the window, I watched my son and daughter-in-law climb out of the car, tanned, relaxed, glowing from a week of luxury, while they waited for word that I had conveniently passed. Nyla walked with the easy confidence of someone who believed her plan had worked perfectly. Dean looked drawn and uneasy, worn down by the weight of what he'd agreed to tolerate, but he was here all the same. I settled into the armchair in the living room, letting my shoulders sag and my hair look messier than usual. Damien sat on the floor near my feet, quietly moving his toys, ready to play his part the moment things began. The front door opened without so much as a knock. Nyla had insisted on keeping a spare key for emergencies. "Lucinda?" she called, her voice bright with manufactured concern. "We're back. How are you feeling?" "I'm in here," I answered, making my voice sound thin and confused. They stepped into the living room, and I watched Nyla closely as she took me in. For a split second, triumph flashed in her eyes before she smoothed it over with worry. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "You look awful. Have you been taking care of yourself?" I've been having trouble," I said, adding a slight slur to my words. Trouble remembering things. The tea helped, but I've been so tired. I can see that, Nyla said, resting a cool hand on my forehead in a mock gesture of care. Dean, look at your mother. She's gone downhill so much in just 1 week. Dean lingered by the doorway, his face pale and strained. Mom, are you okay? He asked. She's been like this since we left, Nyla answered quickly, exactly as I'd hoped. Getting worse every day. I think it might be time to seriously revisit our talk about alternative living arrangements. Alternative living arrangements, her polite way of saying a nursing home, where I'd be even more alone and even easier to finish off. I don't understand what's happening to me, I said, drawing on the very real fear and confusion I'd lived with for the past 2 years. Sometimes I can't remember if I've eaten or what day it is. Yesterday I woke up and didn't know where I was for several minutes. That's completely normal at your age, Nyla soothed, and I could hear the excitement she was trying to hide. These things happen as people get older. The important thing is that you have family who cares about you. Family who cares. The same woman who had been slowly poisoning me for 2 years was lecturing me about family. Nyla, I said, looking up at her with what I hoped appeared to be grateful trust, I want to thank you for taking such good care of me, for making sure I have everything I need. Of course, she said, smiling prettily. That's what daughters-in-law are for. Especially the tea, I added, watching her face. You always make sure I have the right tea to help with my problems. Something sharpened in her expression. I could almost see her mind running through dosages and timelines. Have you been drinking all of it? She asked. Those packets I made are stronger than usual. They should really help with the sleep issues you've been having. Oh yes, I assured her. I've been very careful to drink it exactly the way you showed me. Every morning and every evening, just like you said. The lie slid out easily. At this point, honesty would have cost us our lives. Good, Nyla said, and the satisfaction in her voice was unmistakable. Consistency is so important with medical issues. Medical issues. She was still pretending she was treating me, not slowly killing me. Dean finally moved from the doorway and sank into the chair across from me. Mom, have you talked to Dr. Reeves lately? He asked. Maybe we should make an appointment to talk about these memory problems. Actually, Nyla cut in quickly, I think Lucinda might be beyond what Dr. Reeves can do at this stage. We may want to speak with a specialist, someone who deals with more advanced cognitive decline. A specialist she could easily manipulate, someone primed to see exactly what she wanted them to see. An old woman slipping into dementia, in need of full-time care. I don't want to be a burden, I said softly, letting my voice crack just a little. If you think it would be better for me to go somewhere else, I said softly. Oh, Mom, Dean replied, and this time I heard real anguish in his voice. Whatever part he'd played in this scheme, seeing me like this was clearly tearing at him. You're not a burden. We just want what's best for you. What's best, Nyla jumped in smoothly, is professional care from people who understand these conditions. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Nyla was relaxed now, certain her plan had worked and eager to move on to the next phase. It was time to spring the trap. Damien, I murmured, resting a hand on my grandson's shoulder, could you get Grandma a glass of water? I'm feeling a little dizzy. He looked up at me, and for a heartbeat our eyes locked. Then he nodded and got to his feet. But instead of walking toward the kitchen, he crossed the room to the bookshelf where we'd hidden the digital recorder. What is he doing? Nyla asked, thrown off by the unexpected movement. Damien, the kitchen is that way. He ignored her, reaching behind the row of books and pulling out the small device. As he turned around with it in his hands, the color drained from Nyla's face. Damien, Dean said, confusion written all over him. What do you have there? And then, for only the second time in his life, my grandson spoke in front of his parents. It's a recorder, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the room. I've been recording everything for Grandma, all the times Mom talked about the medicine she's been putting in the tea. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Nyla jerked back as if someone had slapped her. Dean's mouth fell open, his expression flipping from confusion to shock to horrified understanding. "That's impossible," Nyla whispered. "He doesn't talk. He can't talk." "I can talk," Damien answered, his voice growing stronger with every word. "I've always been able to talk. You just made me too scared to do it in front of anybody." "Damien?" Dean's voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been able to talk?" "My whole life," Damien said, stepping closer to my chair. "But Mom told me that if I ever talked when I wasn't supposed to, she'd send me away and hurt Grandma, so I learned to stay quiet." 8 years of forced silence came pouring out at once, and with every word I could see Nyla's carefully engineered reality breaking apart. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice pitching higher. "He's developmentally delayed. The doctors confirmed it. The tests you manipulated," I cut in, my own voice suddenly firm and steady as I dropped the act of confusion. "Just like you've manipulated everything else." Nyla spun toward me, her face contorted with panic and fury. How am I coherent?" I finished for her. "Probably because I haven't been drinking your special tea for the last 5 days." The admission hung in the air like a grenade. Dean stared at me, then at her, his face ghost white. "What tea?" he asked, his voice hollow. "What is she talking about?" "The tea your wife has been using to slowly poison me for the last 2 years, I said, pushing myself up from the chair with more strength than I'd had in months. "The tea laced with drugs to make me seem senile and confused. The tea that was supposed to kill me this week while you were safely out on your cruise." "That's insane," Nyla said, but there was no conviction behind it. "You're having another episode, Lucinda. You're confused." "Am I?" I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the folder Damien had given me. "Then explain these." I opened it and read aloud from her own notes. October 10th, prepared concentrated doses for cruise week. Calculated amounts should be sufficient for permanent resolution within 48-72 hours of administration. Nyla's face went chalk white as she recognized her own handwriting. Dean looked like he might throw up. "Permanent resolution?" "Nyla," I continued, "is that what you call murdering your husband's mother?" "I never—" she started, then cut herself off, realizing anything she said would only dig her deeper. "And Damien," I said, placing a steady hand on my grandson's shoulder, "has been protecting both of us the only way he could, by staying silent, by watching, by gathering evidence, by being brave enough to finally speak when it mattered most." Dean stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. "Damien, is this true? Has your mother been—" "She's been hurting Grandma for a long time," Damien said quietly. "And she made me promise never to tell anyone I could talk, or she'd make you send me away forever." The manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the slow destruction of a family through fear and lies, it was all laid bare now. Nyla, watching everything crumble, was starting to show who she really was. "You have no proof," she said, though her voice trembled. "A confused old woman and a mentally defective child. No one will believe you." "Actually," I replied, picking up my phone, "I think Dr. Reeves will be very interested in my blood test results, showing dangerous levels of drugs I was never prescribed, and Detective Morrison will be fascinated by your research on accidental overdoses in elderly patients." As I began dialing the numbers I'd already saved, Nyla made one last, desperate move. She lunged toward Damien, no doubt hoping she could frighten him back into silence before it was too late. She never reached him. 8 years of pent-up protective fury surged through me and gave me strength I didn't know I had. I stepped between them, planting myself in front of Damien, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, I let my anger show. "Don't you dare touch him," I said, my voice ringing with a force that froze her in place. "You've terrorized this child long enough." The sound of sirens was already growing louder outside. Justice was finally coming to my door. 9 months later, I stood in the same kitchen, watching Damien help me roll out dough for chocolate chip cookies. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, no longer feeling like barriers keeping danger out, just warm frames letting in light and peace. "Can I add the vanilla now, Grandma?" Damien asked, his voice bright with the easy curiosity of a child who no longer had to hide how smart he was. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, still marveling, every single day, at the simple miracle of being able to have real conversations with my grandson. The legal process had moved quickly once all the evidence was laid out. Dr. Reeves's blood work, combined with Nyla's printed research and her handwritten planning notes, formed an airtight case for attempted murder. The recording Damien and I made during that final confrontation captured her practically confessing in her own words. But the most devastating blow to her defense had been Damien's testimony. Once child psychologists evaluated him and confirmed not only that he could communicate normally, but that he was exceptionally intelligent, the entire lie she had built collapsed. In court, Nyla was exposed as a woman who had forced her own child into silence for years, while also plotting the slow murder of an elderly family member she pretended to care for. The judge showed no mercy. Nyla was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder, elder abuse, and child endangerment. The fact that she had been poisoning me while presenting herself as my devoted caregiver infuriated the court. Dean's situation was more complicated. At first, the prosecution considered charging him as an accessory, but his full cooperation, his honest testimony, and his visible remorse led to a plea agreement. He received 5 years probation and was ordered into counseling to address his failure to protect both his mother and his son. Most importantly, he voluntarily gave up custody of Damien and named me as guardian. He understood that his passivity had allowed years of abuse to happen, and he wanted Damien to have the safest, healthiest chance at recovery. "The court psychologist says I might catch up to my grade level by next year," Damien said as he carefully measured out the vanilla. "She says I'm probably smarter than most kids my age, even though I missed so much school." "I'm not surprised," I told him honestly. "You were smart enough to protect both of us for years. Catching up on schoolwork will be easy for you." His transformation over the past 6 months had been astonishing. Without the constant fear that had shadowed his childhood, he blossomed into the lively, inquisitive, talkative boy he was always meant to be. His teachers were amazed by how fast he was progressing, and his therapist said his resilience was remarkable. "Dr. Martinez wants to know if you'll come to my session next week," Damien said, naming the child psychologist who'd been helping him work through the trauma. "She wants to talk about family stuff. You know, about healing." "Of course I'll come," I said. "We're in this together, remember?" Healing hadn't been simple for either of us. I'd had to face the painful truth that, even unknowingly, I hadn't been able to protect my grandson from years of emotional abuse. The guilt of that nearly crushed me until Dr. Martinez gently helped me see the full picture. "You were being systematically poisoned and manipulated," she told me in one of our joint sessions. "You couldn't protect Damien because you were fighting for your own survival, often without realizing it. What matters now is that you're both safe and working together to heal." The financial fallout was significant but manageable. My treatment to clear the remaining drugs from my system had been extensive, and Damien would need long-term therapy. But the life insurance policy Nyla had been so eager to cash in was now being used to fund our recovery instead. Even more importantly, we discovered the house was unquestionably mine. Nyla's plans had depended on me dying before I could change my will. Instead, I lived long enough to update every document, making sure Damien would be taken care of no matter what happened to me. "Grandma," Damien said as we slid the cookie sheets into the oven, "do you think Dad will ever come see us again?" It was a question he asked from time to time, and I always answered him honestly. Dean had visited twice since sentencing, stiff, awkward meetings where he tried to reconnect with a son he'd failed to protect. The damage was deep, and whether the relationship could truly be repaired remained uncertain. "I don't know," I told him gently. "Your father is dealing with a lot of guilt and shame about what happened. He knows he didn't protect you, and that's very hard for him to face." "I don't hate him," Damien said thoughtfully. "I just wish he'd been stronger." The wisdom in that simple sentence never stopped astonishing me. This 9-year-old child, he'd turned 9 just 2 months after the trial, had developed an understanding of people that most adults never reach. "Strength comes in different forms," I told him. "You showed incredible strength by staying quiet when you had to, and then speaking up when it truly mattered. Your father is learning a different kind of strength now, the strength to face what he did, accept the truth, and try to become better." The timer for the cookies went off, and as we pulled the trays from the oven, I thought about how completely our lives had changed. The kitchen that had once been a place of danger and deception was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. The house that had felt like a trap was now a sanctuary where Damien could finally be himself without fear. "Mrs. Patterson from next door asked if you're feeling better," Damien said as we set the cookies on the counter to cool. "She said you seem more like yourself lately." Mrs. Patterson's words meant more to me than she knew. She had been one of the neighbors Nyla had convinced that I was slipping into dementia. Watching me suddenly become sharp and active again had confused her, until Nyla's crimes became public and everything finally made sense. "Tell Mrs. Patterson I'm feeling better than I have in years," I said, "and invite her over for cookies once these cool down." As we cleaned up the flour and sugar scattered over the counters, I thought about the call I'd had the week before with my lawyer, Margaret Chen. She'd called to let me know that Nyla's appeals had been denied and that her sentence would stand. "She'll be eligible for parole in 12 years, Margaret had said, "but given the severity of the charges and the psychological evaluations, early release isn't likely." 12 years. By the time Nyla is even considered for parole, Damien will be 21 and more than capable of protecting himself. I'll be 78, and I hope I'll still be healthy enough to stand beside him if he ever needs me to. "Do you ever think about her?" Damien asked suddenly, as if he'd followed my train of thought. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do you?" "Not as much as I used to," he said. "Dr. Martinez says that's normal. She says when someone hurts you for a long time, it takes a while to stop expecting them to hurt you again." The resilience of children never stops amazing me. But I also know his healing is still in progress. There are still nights when he wakes from nightmares about being taken away. There are still moments when a sharp tone makes him flinch. But every day, he grows stronger, more grounded in the certainty that he is safe. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I asked, a question I'd never really been able to ask him before. "A doctor," he said without hesitation. "Like Dr. Martinez, but for kids who can't talk because they're too scared. I want to help them find their voices." The idea that this boy, who had spent years trapped in silence, wanted to dedicate his life to helping other children speak was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "That's a wonderful dream," I told him, "and I think you'll be amazing at it." "Will you help me study?" he asked. "For as long as I'm here," I promised. "And even after that, you'll have everything you need. I've already made sure of it." That evening, we sat out on the porch watching the sun go down. Damien curled up beside me with a book, something he did every night now, making up for years of lost chances to learn and read. "Grandma," he said, glancing up from the page, "do you think we're safe now? Really safe?" It was the question at the center of everything we'd lived through. I took a moment before answering, because this child deserved the truth, not comforting lies. "I think we're as safe as anyone can be in this world," I said finally. "But more importantly, we know how to recognize danger now. We know how to protect each other, and we know our voices matter." He nodded thoughtfully and went back to his book. As the darkness settled and the porch light wrapped us in its warm glow, I thought about the long, painful road that had brought us here. Nyla had tried to silence us both, me with poison and gaslighting, Damien with threats and fear. She had nearly succeeded in tearing our lives apart. But in the end, truth was stronger than her lies. The silence she forced on us had been broken, replaced by open conversations, real love, and the kind of safety that comes from knowing you are believed. Later, As I tucked Damien into bed, he looked up at me with those bright brown eyes that no longer needed to hide anything. "I love you, Grandma," he said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied. "Sleep well." "No more nightmares," he said with quiet certainty. "Dr. Martinez says nightmares go away when you feel really safe." Now, I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever faced something even remotely similar? Being betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments below. I read as many as I can. And while you're here, I've left 2 more of my most shocking stories on the final screen. Both are favorites on the channel, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for watching my story all the way to the end.